Yeah. Yeah.
Mine working? Hello? Yes. So we are. Bom dia. Welcome.
Good
If
morning.
please make sure that you have your interpreters on. We are so excited to have you here today. We are going to try to get started pretty much on time. We have two very important workshops this morning, and we want to make sure we have plenty of time to hear everyone speaking today. This morning, we are going to have our first workshop. Both of these workshops are based on the environment, sustainability, and religion. The first one that we're having this morning is religion and sustainable development. And all too often, religion, when it comes to sustainable development, is something that is not put on the table. It's something that we do not discuss enough about. We have had the opportunity to discuss how these topics of religion and sustainable development are very much together. A matter of fact, just to talk about two of the different topics that we've had previously, Victoria and Yabius Nogore Souza talked very specifically on Monday about how their religious beliefs and the spiritual examples of their parents shaped their agroforestry experience, and especially their teaching of techniques to other people around the world. Yesterday, we had a wonderful discussion between Catherine Marshall and David Saperstein that was very specific about the power of religion and the SDGs. A matter of fact, Catherine pointed out that there is an assumption that with development, religion is less important, which is not true. And there is another assumption that religion does not have anything to do with political power, which is also not true. She pointed out that every one of the 17 SDGs has a religious dimension. David Saperstein gave us a very powerful invitation and a plan of action, which included inviting religious congregations to act in practical ways to save the environment. He even gave us some wonderful examples, real-world examples. He also reminded us the power of women in this work, especially well-educated women, and how important it is that we involve women in this sustainability. Today, we're going to continue this theme, and I am so excited about this panel because we have a variety of viewpoints that will be discussed today. In terms of the way we're going to handle the panel this morning, pardon me. We will first have Ana Santos to speak to us. She is an entrepreneur and a member of the Lauiza, I hope I said that right. Also Anna Holanda, who's also a community leader in that organization, and also Celio Said. The three of them will be speaking together. After then, we'll have Peter Francois, who is the Associate Professor in Cultural Evolution at the University of Oxford. And then we'll have Diana Gerson, who is the Senior Advisor for Partnerships and External Relations at Interfaith Alliance, which has also been a wonderful sponsor of this event. And then Yuri Shmetki Almeida Balshiar Tizi, He's with Abren, Brazil, and he's the project manager of EUCD, European Union Climate Dialogue. So we're very excited about this panel, and I will turn the time over to Anna.
Olá, bom dia. Eu sou a mãe Ana de Oiá. Sou
Good
baiana.
morning. I'm Mother Ana of Oya. I am from Bahia. I am from the Amazon in my heart. I have an Axé house in Laranjeira Park and several works in the communities by the river shores. I want to thank the General Coordinator of the Ministry of the Human Rights and Religious Freedom, Yagilda. She invited me to be here. Now, I turn the word to our friend Sally. We're gonna share the time here. His mic's not working yet. His mic is not working. Okay. Good morning. My name is Célio Said. I'm a photographer. I am the writer of several books about Amazon. This is a subject that interests me a lot, and a great friend of mine, Anna, invited me to get to know better about the subject so that maybe in the future we can develop more books about this. Thank you. I am Ana Holanda. I was invited to be here by Ana Moreno, Ana Santos. I was Subsecretary of Communitary Actions in the Municipality of Amazonas and also of social action. We have a family history that is great. I had a relative who was the governor of Amazonas. He came from Maranhão in the 19th century. He was really young to be the governor. He built the theater in Amazonas, and when he arrived Amazonas, because he came with my great grandparent, he saw the need to produce in the state not only light, electricity, but also the important issue of sanitation. So many of the works that we have in the municipality of Manaus was for his hands. Unfortunately, he died young, but he left a legacy, a heritage for us to work in the communities. And apart from that, he was a spiritualist. My great grandfather was one of the first ones to introduce the spiritualism religion in Amazonas, and they had the first periodic about spiritualism, and he's the founder of the Spiritualist Foundation organization of Amazonas. So the religion is extremely important to the development of any society. All of our beliefs, our values, we can use to bring development to our communities and our society. And that includes the environment, right? That's something that he has always been worried about. He left his heritage. He had the issue of sanitation, and up to this day in Manaus, it's a very hard issue. We have 126 communities in our city, and many of them they don't have sanitation, and they suffer. They go to the borders of the rivers, and many of our forests are polluted because of the lack of sanitation. So we need public policies that involve this subject. It involves the society, and the religion is one of the means we can use that may us through religion bring education so that we educate our population. Of course, the public power has their importance, but we as community, we are important, and we are supposed to preserve and develop our communities. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. And with my presentation, I have three broad aims. The first one is I want to set aside a few minutes to share some reflection on what I have learned over both this meeting so far and a preceding one which took place last week in Belém. Secondly, I want to share with you how the issues discussed impact, in a way, the workflow of one of my projects, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. And thirdly, I would like to think through what this means for this group, how it can, whose aim it is to influence the G20 agenda. So those three things I would like to start. And I would like to start with two observations. The first one is that the idea of instrumentalization of religion is so accepted and entrenched with the majority of policymakers. And what do I mean with this? When religion is being discussed within the policy world, it is not discussed on its own terms, but it is usually discussed on what it can do to further other agendas. For example, and especially so, how it links with the Sustainable Development Goals. I don't mind this angle. I think it's a good one. I think we all agree, and we heard from talks with Catherine and others, how religion can play a role, an important role, on furthering the Sustainable Development Goals. But at the same time, I do want to stress that we need to pause and say, well, hang on, how did we end up in this situation whereby religion is judged on what it can do on other things, rather than being judged as a good thing in its own right? So my own background is very much in the human rights agenda, is focusing on freedom of religion or belief, is focusing on Article 18. And I do believe that Article 18 is a good thing in its own right, and I don't necessarily feel we need always to say, well, fine, you have your Article 18, but what does it actually do in terms of reduction of conflict, in terms of reduction of poverty, and so on? Now, what I found very refreshing both last week and this week is that here too, in this audience, and I acknowledge it's a rotating set of audience, there is some pushback to that as well. I mean, religion is not necessarily and only and merely seen as instrumentalized for other goods. Religion is still central to lifestyles, to sets of beliefs, and it is actually very hard to separate it out from other parts of societal life. And this leads me to my second observation, which is closely related. Again, we have accepted, or I think the policy world has accepted, that the use of metrics is seen as the normal thing, the only thing, and the way forward. And you need to have metrics, you need to be able to communicate them, ideally by saying things go up with a certain percentage or go down with a certain percentage in order to be taken serious and to be heard by the policy world. So I'm no stranger to metrics. I live in the world of indexes, dashboards, as Catherine said, Tableau one, trends that go up and down, and so on. But I'm also conscious that this is only part of the story. And yes, here in this audience, we then often say, oh, but stories are important as well, because that is what's been remembered. But I think it's not simply to say you have data and metrics on the one hand, you have stories that can be very powerful on the other hand. I think what I learned today is how the discussions here feed into a more global discussion about the uses, the acceptable uses, the limitations of how data and metrics are being used. And I think both sets of meetings were a very powerful reminder that metrics are never neutral. So just to give you three quick examples here. Firstly, most metrics have as the unit of analysis the state. So if you do not identify with the state, or if the state is only one of your many hats of identity, by definition, a lot of the metrics already have serious limitations. Secondly, State metrics are then being aggregated on the global level. And again, if you are part of a tradition which is relatively small in numbers, you feel that the aggregated global level doesn't speak to yourself. And you feel like, well, why am I left out? I'm listening here to a rather sterile discussion about global trends, but my own lived experience, which determines 100% of what I do every day, has hardly a link with this. And thirdly, I think metrics have, at the moment, adopted a philosophy around openness, around transparency. You need to be able to share your data, you need to make them available, and so on. And I'm a big advocate of that on the one hand, but it has become normative. And what I learned here is that there is a rightful place to have resistance against all of these three dimensions I just mentioned, that questions can be asked. What if your tradition or group is too small, so you don't feel you're being represented? But hang on a minute, I've also learned that there are 400 million indigenous people in the world. Maybe then, definitely that should be a major trend in the global population, but maybe we, as a global community, have failed to represent that trend in adequate ways because we slice them up as part of larger and major nation states. So we need to think through how do we represent and engage with the agenda, with the diversity of the world. There is an important pushback here if people aggregate data to a global level. What I every time hear is the importance of the context, being sensitive to the holistic view and view of life people have. And if you aggregate data, all that context is by definition to a large extent stripped away. And I think we need to have further thought and thinking on how to engage with that. Thirdly, I think there's a bit of pushback here, especially in Arnie's talk yesterday, about the normative element of what is open. I mean, in most of the discussions I had over the last 2 weeks, it was very much felt that stories, data are owned by communities. If I advocate the use of open data, transparent methodologies, and I share everything, by definition, I give away that data to whoever wants to use it, including large language models who just scoop up all my data, carefully constructed, and use it for often commercial reasons. This is an element I think the academic community needs to have way better grip on and think through what it means. It's one thing to extend a welcoming hand, an invitation to say, please work with us, but the flip side of that is that actually by adopting an open stance, that means data is being given away and we have no control on who uses it or not. I mean, observing this set of tensions is obviously not enough. There are theoretically two ways or two extreme ways to go forward. One option is to say we do not partake in this debate. But that also means within the policy world, it will be extremely hard to near impossible to have a voice. And I think that's a bad situation, especially if 400 million people are not being heard to. The other one is to adopt and say we will play the metrics game and we will engage with it. But then you give up on some of your principles, on your view, and also it reduces diversity. So my question and challenge is how to turn this tension into a productive one. And I'm going to quickly run you through some ways of how I tried in my own project to turn this tension into some more productive first steps and approaches. And then I'm going to conclude with a call for what I think this group could try to achieve. So the first thing I need to say is that in my project, I'm trying to map the evolution or the history of religious tolerance through the ages. And I link this with the history of conflict, the history of resilience of societies, how cohesive they are. So a first thing I do to ensure we do not flatten out diversity is to make sure all our data is evolving continuously. So it is also a crowdsourced project. Everyone, including all of you here, can go to the website and query some of the data, suggest alternatives, updates, and so on and so forth. Secondly, we are incorporating, which is really hard to do in the humanities and the social sciences, we record levels of uncertainty and levels of disputedness. And we not only encode those in the data itself, we take them on board when we do analyses. And I think it's very important not to rely on the authority of one expert who says, move over, I'm going to tell you how it is, and say, for example, the situation of religious tolerance in Brazil is this, and then at the same time, I know there will be many different experts who challenge these views. So I think any data set on religious tolerance especially needs to try to incorporate those different views and be open or transparent about those. Another thing I would like to highlight in the context of the project is that we are so worried, or we take into heart the whole concept of aggregating data. So we are using books written by historians on societies, but those are often 400 pages with lots of context, and the descendant communities often feel happy to engage with this and happy with the sensitivity in which their culture has been described. But if you then aggregate that, you lose that context, right? So one of the things that we are now setting up as a side project is looking exactly at what is the process which takes place and how can we ensure the descendant communities are still on board with our project we do. And I'm pleased to say we do that not on our own project only, but with a set of similar projects. And the host country for which some of these workshops will organize is Brazil, and that's no surprise in a way. And thirdly, I think we need, as a global project, to do a lot better in increasing the diversity of the people that are part of our trends. So I'm very pleased that since last week, through the works of Ivo here, who's sitting there on my right-hand side, we are now setting up a collaboration with the Federal University of Pará to ensure the Brazilian voice or voices are actually part of the database. So this brings me to some conclusions on the project first. Firstly, I think this once again highlights the importance of collaboration. Our project is already using and working together with 300 plus historians and archaeologists. It is in a way that collaboration of 300 people working on a common goal and a common mission, which is one of the key outcomes. Secondly, it demonstrates the need of doing what it's called slow science, doing a job proper, going often the hard way, rather than a quick data set and some quick results. This sits a little bit uneven with the urgency of the issues we're talking about. How to balance slow science, because if you give a scientist endless money and time, then that's my retirement project, right? I'm not going to do anything for the next 20 years. How to balance that? And I think our project, and I'm seeing more and more similar attempts, we're going for, no doubt, still an imperfect attempt to find a balance between speaking a language which works, which is metrics, because you want to be heard, you want to have influence on the policy world, but at the same time incorporating diversity and difference. So what does this mean for a group like here who tries to shape, to set, to steer the agenda of the G20? I think, firstly, the push to have this balance on the agenda, not to flatten reality, but to embrace diversity, difference, and pluralism is an important agenda item, and I think this group should make this message heard basically all the time. Whatever the specific recommendations they have, a push towards diversity, not flatten reality, should be the philosophy or should be the overall steer. Furthermore, I think there is an argument that this tension between metrics on the one hand and diversity on the other is actually not limited to religion only. Whichever topic you look at, whether if it's health, whether if it's women's rights, whether if it's the environment, this tension is there. But what sets the topic or, the sphere of religion aside is that we are offering a good test case to try out new models in exploring this tension. Religion already has a tradition of having dialogue amongst themselves. If I look just at this group, I notice the number of initiatives that are centered around interfaith dialogue. It is already well organized. Most religions have an organization behind them, know how to speak, how to communicate, and so on. There's a history of speaking up. There's a history of not being afraid to take the contrarian voice. So I think, in a way, we should be able to use these strengths and say, well, there will be a push towards diversity and against flattening the reality of metrics and so on, but religion is actually a very, very powerful test case to show the limitations of that and show and explore new ways of dealing with that diversity. Thank you.
Kind of laid out this tension between, especially with data and metrics, in terms of what is happening between metrics and diversity, and how important it is that we look at those. And I thought, especially your point that oftentimes the data and metrics is really a part of the state, rather than looking at those people not part of the state, which is something that we've been talking a lot about during this time together. I also wanted to say thank you to also some of the points that you were talking about. We are so blessed to have you here in terms of helping us understand the history of what's happened, especially in Manaus, and the background that you give to us and the diversity that you allow us to have on this panel. We will now hear from Diana.
Good morning. So, I want to start by a little bit of an exercise. No, nobody has to stand up, no one has to do push-ups. But I have a colleague in the United States who is the executive director of the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life. And he always starts his presentations in a certain way, and I find it most useful. Everybody take a moment and close your eyes. Come on, close your eyes. And I want you to visualize your favorite place in nature. Do you have that place? Do you see the image? Now open your eyes. By a show of hands, how many of your images, that picture, that snapshot, had a person in the space? 1, 2, 2 people had a person in that natural place. 3. We tend to generate images of pristine, undisturbed wildlife and spaces when considering the environment. There is a notion that human beings are, in fact, disruptors in nature and not intrinsic parts of it. Sacred ecology is a critical framework that can deconstruct perceived separations of environmental and human issues. And I believe that's at the heart of our work together. All faiths believe that children and families are important, and in fact are deserving of care and protection. And most of the world's faiths emphasize the unique value of our children, not as vessels for future adults, but for who they are today. Many faiths also emphasize care for creation and the natural world to build upon the world we know today. Children in the natural world are the agents of the future. However, to create a hopeful future, we also have to protect them in the present, today. How can we help them grow in mind, in body and soul when their health is compromised by polluted air, land, and water. So much of what we have been talking about these last few days. Whether it's in an industrialized zone with bad air, a river filled with trash, or chemicals leaching into our soils. Children across the globe are forced to live in conditions that will impact the rest of their lives. How can a child have a healthy, fulfilling life if the core spaces in their homes and in their communities do not have access to clean air, soil, and water? And it is significant and impactful when stewardship involves planting trees, recycling, and shifting individual behaviors, but it has to do more. We have to do more. Stewardship must embody care for creation and all beings, locally, globally, and systemically. Climate change invokes particularly damaging spiritual, physical, and emotional crises in which children inherit a neglected future. This moment is not a crisis of ecological collapse, resource scarcity, and intensifying natural disasters. I believe our faiths, our sacred texts, our traditions would argue that this is a crisis of love and care. Today's environmental changes are one of the many global instances in which children have been silenced and generational futures are being sacrificed on a daily basis. Across the globe, children are forced to grow up in compromised situations. We see warfare, we see poverty, we see inequality, chipping away at childhood and intensifying situations in which the world is surrounding children in polluted, destroyed, and a world lacking in love. Most of the world's faiths emphasize the unique value of children, not as vessels, but as our future. So what does that mean? If today's families and children and youth know their well-being is threatened, and they do, ask any young person. They will tell you what is wrong in the environment in which they live. They teach us. Environmental justice is essential to addressing child safety and security due to the multifaceted impacts of human-caused environmental change and ecological degradation. Instability has diverse drivers and impacts, including armed conflict, resource scarcity, natural disasters, societal collapses, and human rights abuses. Yesterday, Catherine, you highlighted the role of religion and faith and people of moral conviction is increasingly essential in the sustainable development space and critical in the sacred work of stewardship of our home, our collective home, Earth. Today's climate crisis is the epitome of today's poly-crisis, driving and driven by cycles of violence. However, its effects are not felt equally. Levels of risk to climate-driven violence are informed by vulnerability, intersections of vulnerabilities, such as poverty, inequality, gender discrimination, and ability, putting children at greater risk of climate disasters and injustice. Exposure to cycles of violence that compromise children's safety and security further increases difficulty in responding to and recovering from environmental crises. Considering the disproportionate impacts of today's environmental changes and environmental injustice, interfaith, intergenerational, and intercultural groups, we need to collaborate and coordinate efforts on local and global scales. We need to do a better job of talking to one another, increasing our collective capacities, and moving the ball forward. A commitment to stewardship and climate justice demonstrates the role of sacred ecology in ending violence against children and safeguarding families. Ecological justice scholars and activists have advocated for meaningful change to focus on the spaces that constitute the environment, the human environment. Where do we live? Where do we learn? Where do we play? Where do we work? And where do we pray? Space-focused reframing has expanded upon issues of social inequality and human health, focusing on how core spaces on human existence becomes compromised in the first place. In pursuit of a just interfaith, intergenerational action, we must critically examine the driving aspects of vulnerability and inequality in heavily impacted areas. Our actions must realign how we are supposed to value children with the earth that is created for them. We can establish a faith-informed retrieval and implementation of ecological health principles by focusing on a four-part framework: living, learning, playing, and praying. And this way, we can explore climate-driven threats in these spaces and how our partnerships with children and communities can foster agency and action. Points of focus include the role of sacred ecology and faith actors in establishing the cross-cutting natures of climate change and child well-being, human rights, and justice-informed responses to the role of the environment as a multiplier of those existing vulnerabilities, the economics, the social, political, and age. The pursuit of interfaith intergenerational collaboration is essential. So let's take a deep dive into those four sectors and put them squarely inside the Sustainable Development Goals, our Sustainable Development Agenda. Living is informed by SDGs 2, Zero Hunger, 13, Climate Action, 14, Life Below Water, 15, Life on Land, and covers the security of home lives, living in harmony with the environment and existence, consciousness, and development in times of instability. Where do we live? Our home is supposed to be a safe place, a safe haven. This is what every parent wants for their child. This is what every person wants for their family. My family and your family, we are all connected. We are one community. We are living together. We're playing. Playing is informed by SDG 3, good health and well-being, 6, clean water and sanitation, 11, sustainable cities and communities, and 12, responsible consumption and production, and explores the importance of joy, creativity, relationship building, and children having time to just be children. Wherever there's a ball, there are going to be children at play. Something we should all remember and we should all enjoy as well as adults. Learning. Learning is informed by SDG 1, no poverty. 4, quality education. 5, gender equality. 10, reduced inequalities, highlighting the importance of knowledge and exploration and challenging young minds. 4, one I feel that connects us all so strongly, praying. Praying is informed by SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, 13, climate action, 16, peace and justice with strong institutions, and 17, partnerships and emphasis on the critical approach of community care and health, early education, of sacred ecology, and communities of faith being safe spaces to explore complicated emotions and spiritual questions. A stewardship and climate justice discourse must include the role of sacred ecology in ending violence against children, all children. Focusing on these four spaces where children grow up living and learning, playing and praying together, we can begin to establish a faith-informed approach. We can build from our foundational understanding of the cross-cutting natures of climate change and child well-being, human rights, justice-informed responses, the role of the environment. And this is an important thing that we need to think about in the context of children worldwide experiencing a crisis of care. The world's children lack a protected earth treated with love, care, dignity, and we are quickly finding a corollary absence of these traits in many aspects of their lives. Children do not grow up in spaces where they can live, play, learn, and pray in safety, face physical, emotional, and spiritual challenges. Children imbued with purposeful wisdom, perspective, and compassion face an existential threat that requires them to grow up faster and foster community care in a state of triage. We know that our children deserve better. We deserve better. Faith actors play a unique role in lifting children and their families up. It's what we have always done. We have a moral voice, a communal strength, and an important role in sustainable development. We must meet this moral moment by pursuing intersectional, holistic approaches to safeguarding physical, emotional, and spiritual health. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. I just love your focus on children and the importance of us not forgetting that the future generation is so important. Just a personal note, I know Diana knows this, but I'm the mother of 12 children and 33 grandchildren, and I really appreciate the focus that Diana always has on this rising generation, how important it is that we think about them, think about their future, and so I so appreciate your message. We will now turn the time over to Yuri, and I am very interested in him talking very practically about things that he has done in terms of the European Union and also here in Brazil. So, Yuri, the time is now yours.
Good afternoon. It is with great satisfaction that I'm here today. My first time in an interfaith forum to talk about sustainability. I talk about residues. Those are waste that we produce. When we talk about waste, our responsibility may seem ended once we trash it.
Vamos lá, gente, apresentação aqui.
Turning on my presentation. Can we get help with transmission? So talking about residues, talking about waste, we all produce waste and we always think that our responsibility ends once it goes to the trash. But the waste we produce has a devastating impact if it's not well treated. Brazil is very behind in managing human residues, very, very behind. My north is the Bible. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, and I'm a part of a community of collectors. I got to know 10 species of different flies. I got to know a smell I had never seen before, and technology is a helper of the environment. We can use technology to prevent those residues to contaminate. ABREM, this association is part of the Technology Council in Colombia. We are also associated to the German Associate of Waste, EBB. We defend the SDGs, as Diane said. Our agenda is part of all those SDGs. We eradicate poverty when we provide them with better conditions. We provide them with PPEs so they don't have to touch the mixed waste. So we need environmental education as well. Zero hunger is with composting, organic fraction, when you have biofertilizers for the environment, and without just putting them and letting them send residues to the environment. Brazil spends over $1 million in treatment due to not treating this waste well. We have a lot of wastelands here in the Amazon. And a lot of this trash go to preservation areas. All of these dumping grounds are on preservation areas. We are destroying our preservation areas to put on waste. There are a lot of accidents or contamination. In Manaus, we always have liquid trash that overflows. We had an accident, killed many fish. Pará, same situation. Brazil had its biggest dumping land sent away. Brazil also has contamination of potable water due to this liquid that is produced by trash. And the waste to energy, the recovery will generate clean energy. It will develop industry and develop communities. And this ODS will promote circular economy. If I can compost, I compost. And what is non-recyclable, we do the thermal treatment so we don't dump it in the environment. This way we generate energy that would be wasted. This is why we call it sanitation. Those industries for combustion, when combined to the dumping grounds, the capture is 30 to 50% max 50. So 70% of the methane will go to the atmosphere. And when we compare the CO2 of the combustion, that is 80 times stronger than methane, we reduce with the combustion 8 times. It's better to do the combustion than to make the soil bad by dumping it and burying it. If you compost, you will eliminate the organic residue, but people don't do that. We mix the trash and we have an environmental problem. Previous actions are done. And due to the routine, due to people's routines, we produce trash. The SDGs 14 and 15. In Brazil, we reduced it 1%, but we actually increased. We are increasing. Our legislation is mirrored to this graph, is hierarchy of resources. Ecological treatment, you contaminate, combusting in grids, co-processing, and substituting petcoke, which is a fossil fuel. Germany, for example, has dumping grounds prohibited. You cannot bury organic matter. You have to treat the residues. And you will treat that until the green line, otherwise it's not sustainable anymore. You have the sustainable treatment, you have paper, you have glass. This is all separated by machinery or by the workers. And a lot of those are non-recyclable due to technical capacity, due to high costs. And it's easier to buy this virgin material, and this will go to the dumpster. And the majority, we cannot recycle over 15% of our trash. 85% will go to a dumping ground. Then we compost, we produce biogas, biofertilizer, renewable gas, biomethane to substitute diesel. And we have the thermal treatment. We have the some residues for building roads. Our carbon footprint is reduced at 40–50% when recovering those metals. And now talking about climate change, this is our main objective as leaderships, as religious leaderships that understand the planet is just one and we have nowhere to go. I think I'm going to heaven, but we only have this planet now. We have the IPCC graph. And if you think about global change and who is saying global warming is a fake, they don't know what they're talking because global warming is past already. It's done. And this blue line, the GWP 20, this is the reality. We are going to go over 2.5 degrees much before that. So our goal is 1.5. And methane is the main one for greenhouse gas emissions. If you follow, every week is news about a volcano, a drought, a wind. Pantanal had never burned. It's having wildfires just like crazy, monkeys falling off the streets. A lot of floods. And this shows that something wrong is happening. This was diagnosed by scientists. A lot of people didn't believe that. And religious communities have a role in that. A lot of the greenhouse gas emissions are here. We have waste handling in orange, and it's just 11% of the total. If you think about wastelands here, you see those are in yellow. The biggest super emissions are dumpsters. And India is just like Brazil, and you see the other countries is very little. And you see the results of thermal treatment. This is Caieiras. It's a small dumpster land. This huge blue stain is methane. This needs to be avoided, not just for greenhouse effective, but we have to think about that. We have a plan of 1 gigawatt. This would be one power plant. This is the goal. Get all the residue and do a thermal electric. We have 3,000 plants like that. This is by Paris. We have by Eiffel Tower, Louvre. They're there for over 20 years. Nobody has died. It's water vapor. It doesn't smell and it destroys the waste and it generates heating. It avoids 600 tons of CO2, thousands of plants, of trees planted. This is the using in Copenhagen. It has the biggest artificial plants in the world. We have Ethiopia. They say you cannot do it in Brazil. Ethiopia has 5, Iran has 5. They have a GDP much smaller. Brazil is very potent. Those are the projects in Brazil, 250,000 mega. Barueri will start operating in 2027. Here is the potential of the metropolitan region. We can invest 4.7 billions, but if we don't do anything, We are going to spend 5 billion in the environment and in public health. It's an avoided cost, bigger than the investment in the plant. We are working to develop that in Manaus and everywhere else. We're going to get tributes of 5.2 billion that can be sent to uh, health, safety. And how are we going to contribute? We can influence the communities. We can teach them how to use compost. We can include good practices, include this for boarding schools. We have to include this in the curriculum of schools. You have to recycle, but is the school recycling? Do they have a worms house in the schools? Practical places of the communities, of the churches, with the members of the church. What are you doing with the residue of your religious community? This is an important point. Promoting debates, talking about public hearings, participating in public hearings. We have public hearings about the subject, and they only have the collectors of recyclable material, and they have been informed, and they say that incinerating trash is absurd. And I say, where are the communities? How can they defend the environment? They are not there. It's you, it's the communities that are going to decide if they want to have a dumpster or a burning waste residue power plants like the ones that they have in Paris. So this is the message. The planet is one, and we must engage to recover the energy of those residues, giving the treatment. This is an agenda that is not just in Manaus, it's everywhere. Waste is an environmental issue. We are going to keep producing residues, and we must be aware. We must know what is the contribution that we are doing as Christians, as a spiritualist. My uncle is from a partner religion of Santo Daime. I've grew respecting all religions, and I want to leave you this final message of saving the planet.
Thank you so much, because I think we do need to understand the reality of the problem. All too often, we talk more concepts, but you really gave us some numbers, some understanding on a very practical level, so thank you so much. We do have about 10-15 minutes for Q&A, and we're hoping that you will have some very specific questions that you would like to ask this very varied panel that have a lot of interesting viewpoints in terms of these really important issues. So I'm opening it up to the floor. If not, I definitely have some questions that I would like to ask too. So would anybody like to start the discussion? If not, I will start with a question that I have, especially for Anna and our wonderful panel here from Manaus. I would like to ask, from your perspective here in Manaus, what kinds of things do you see us doing to help the environment more, especially either from a grassroots individual level or from a religious level?
Bom, a nível individual, a gente desenvolve trabalho dentro das
At
comunidades.
individual level, we have work in the communities because we think it's important for us to come from education. So just like I said in the beginning of our meeting, We have 126 neighborhoods in Manaus. A big part of them, they don't have sanitation. And every year, Manaus takes from the bed rivers the equivalent to 2,500 containers of garbage every year. So they are not working to dispollute the rivers. When we have the social projects, we try to bring to the populations, to the communities we visit every day, the importance of not throwing the garbage on the rivers. We say, well, people say, well, but Mrs. Anna, there's no other place for us to throw the garbage. Okay, you don't have a place to throw the garbage, but get a plastic bag, because when this river overflows, well, when every place is filled of garbage, your house is gonna be flooded. And then we're trying to bring this conscious of mind to people. When I talk about education and the importance of education, she just mentioned the kids, right? We need to work with our kids because there are some situations like me. I'm a solo mother, and we get to some people's houses and some family houses. We have kids for 15 years, and they are already used to throw the garbage in the river. So if we work with this kid, not only in the school, at school, but also at church, in the congregation, wherever this kid is, we will be contributing. I am a Catholic. I was born Catholic, but I am a part of an African matrix religion, and my grandmother is from another Peruvian church. We live in a great race and religious diversity, so if we don't play our role as human beings, I always mention the hummingbird, fabulous. The forest is catching fire, and he's the only one to trying to bring water little by little. We gotta do that ants work, As individuals, we gotta try to do our part. So every day, me as a human being, I try when I am in a communities every day, pretty much every day, especially in the west zone here in Manaus. It's not easy to put in the people's minds these things, but in kids it's easier. We should bring to the adult mindset the importance of preserving the environment where they are. I remember when I was in the secretariat a couple of years ago, Manaus has 1,700 risk areas. They are close to dangerous areas, and we took 15 families out of there. When I was visiting one of them, the lady had four little kids. It's a 4x4 house, really tight. And I talked to her and I was like, "Why are you here? I have no other place to live. But let me show you something." She would get bags of ice and every garbage she would throw there. And then I was so emotional and I was like, well, humankind has a solution. If we try to do things, well, she didn't study. She was pregnant when she was 11. She was in the fourth kid and she was trying to do her part. So, guys, I worry a lot. And I think it's really important to have this discussion and that we should invest not only in infrastructure, just like he mentioned, in the recycling plants, in the treatment plants. Our sanitary field in Manaus is old, it's above its capacity now. We have a daily struggle, and people are complaining because around the landfill there are communities, people who survive and live there, and they feel that horrendous smell. They are constantly sick. So it's really important for us to see another way to treat our garbage. But what I say is, it's important for us to be discussing this here because we should treasure and foster that we should use public means, whatever means we can use, we should empower that people who are worried, just like you mentioned, education and schools, right? If the school is not teaching churches, temples, several entities, the third sector, they take care of abandoned kids. We have problems here in Amazonas. I visited a family, and the little girl, she was 11 years old, and she was on the second kid. And it was the stepfather's fault. And I questioned the mother, and she was like, well, who would bring food to my table? So it's a reality that we live here in Amazonas and maybe in other states, but this is frequent. And we need to protect, we need to take care. And the only way to take care is through education, culture, religion, and that's it. That's my message. So, Anna, as an individual struggling, as a manager, we're struggling every day. We're on the street because the management is not only sitting on a table, but also in everyday life when you see the reality of the city where you live. That's it. And thank you very much.
Yolanda, I completely agree that it needs to be individual and it needs to be based on education. Homana, I know that you have a question.
Yes, em português.
Yes, I'll ask this question in Portuguese. By listening to the several contributions, I we have the reinforcement of this understanding of the role of religion. So thank you. I think everything that is being put here and being said here, especially by people who are part of religious groups, is very latent. So my question is, you don't need to answer here, Mariana, but we should think, Catherine and everybody who's here sitting at the table by Friday, and beyond that until August and late after that, effectively in an organized and systematic way. How can we know what are the processes, the instruments that these groups, these organized groups through organizations just like IF20 and other organizations that were attending here, how can they actually systematically join addressing this global challenge, right? That has been affecting climate, the forests, lives, species, and the human relations. Regardless of governments, of course, there's the work that will be done of suggesting some public policies. But beyond that, since we are so many and we are so diverse and in a certain way spread out. So that's my question for you. And secondly, at the same time that we feel overwhelmed because this challenge is huge, but you talked about acting locally and in within their sphere of actuation. It was really good to see brain's example, because Yuri mentioned about what's being done, and it's good when we see possibility for escalation, specifically for churches, religious groups. You already have been a project manager to think in a line of acting to actually escalate with shrines, temples, sacred places, and different places, something that maybe can conduct and be scalable. And that's the second question. And last, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we started a pilot project that came from young leaders who are members of the church to for the small clubs that would take partake of the sacrament. It's recycled material, but it was going to wrong places. So without overwhelming the ecclesiastical leaders, they are collecting several regions of Paraná, in some places in Northeast, and in other countries in Latin America, as a pilot project. It's nothing official, it's their initiative to give the right destiny. Maybe this is an emblematic small answer because we have a little cup that we use to partake of the sacrament, something that is so sacred and that brings the awareness for consciousness. But we want to see that translated in something scalable. This is great. So this provocation or question is thrown to
Thank you
you.
so much for that question. I do want to make a comment that one of the power of a meeting like this is to make connections with people from different areas of the world, but also different viewpoints on these important subjects. And I love the fact that we are able to educate each other, but we're also able to meet together and make some of those contexts that you were talking about, those networks that are so important to happen. Would anybody like to also talk very practically? We only have a couple more minutes, but I enjoyed Romana's comment about the importance of doing these practical things.
Eu gostaria de falar o seguinte, eu não vim aqui com a intenção de
I'd
apresentar.
like to say that I'm not here with the intention to present my project or sell anything. My intention here is to absorb more, know more about everything, diversity, garbage, whatever, everything that is happening here now. And I think it's very important because the issue related to the garbage, especially in Brazil, the politicians in Brazil, they see themselves. They work for themselves, for their kids. And this is an issue. It's a social issue that is not taken seriously, it's taken for granted. About the issue of the garbage that he mentioned, well, I have a project, for instance, for 10 years ago, I started in parallel, and I thought, well, the day I have the possibility, I will have this. We have basic education booklets to educate kids, and I joined my photographic work with ludic characters. They are superheroes that fight against the garbage. People who take care of the garbage, they collect the garbage in Brazil are garis. They are called garisitos. So they're going to educate children through these booklets. And in schools, through these booklets, kids would learn how not to discharge garbage, what pollutes the river. Maybe we have a sea of garbage, just like I showed you. So I have this work, and it's being kept for 10 years. Now I am sure that I was already engaged in this type of attitude. We just have someone who's willing to take that onward. And here, people who can take this onward is the political class, but we don't have a vision for that. For them, they don't really care. It's more interesting for them to see the projects later and to get um, people there to say that the city hall is cleaning the river, but they don't have the work for education so that kids grow with this mindset so that at home kids can tell to their parents, well, you cannot throw that in the river because when the river comes down, it's going to pollute, it's going to kill the animals, it's going to harm the nature, you know? That's what I had to say.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to end this wonderful discussion. I have so enjoyed the variety of viewpoints that we have here on this panel. Yesterday, I really enjoyed Rachel's use of analogy at the end, and I did want to kind of share another analogy. When we add carbon to iron, the resulting metal is steel, which is stronger and much more useful than either elements alone. If we think of climate and ecology as iron, which is important and widespread throughout the world, but it's also common, it can also rust and disintegrate. But when we use a little bit of carbon, which I think a lot of that is the religious voices that are trying to get involved in this, but also individuals and education that is helping our ecology and our environment. It's amazing that the result is such a stronger relationship between those two, that we are able to truly make a difference and change, hopefully change the world and the things that are happening in the world. So thank you so much, each one of you, for your wonderful viewpoints and the way you have educated us today. Thank you again.
Muito obrigado aos nossos painelistas, às nossas
Thank you
painelistas.
very much, our panelists, for this excellent panel with distinct perspectives about the topic of environment,
Temos certeza que essas contribuições serão muito importantes para
sustainable
essa
development, and
construção que temos
religion.
feito
This
ao
is
longo
really
do
important for what we're
Fórum Territórios
building
Verdes.
in the
Nós
Interfaith
teremos
Forum G20.
agora momento
We
de
will
coffee
have
break,
now the
convidamos todos a
coffee break,
participar.
so we will invite
Depois do
all
coffee
of
break
you.
teremos uma
After
sessão
the
para
coffee
a
break, we will
continuidade
have
do
a
painel, mas
session
com
which
uma
is
outra
going to be pretty
composição.
much
No tema
a
mesmo,
continuation
contaremos
of
aqui
this
com a
panel. We're going to talk
participação do
about the same
secretário
thing.
nacional
We're going
Adalberto
to
Felício
have
Maluf
Adalberto
e
Felício
também o assessor
Maluf, the National
Legislação
Secretary
Social
for
e
Urban Environment,
Diversidade,
and
Tássios
also
Fernandes, ambos do Ministério do
Tassis
Meio Ambiente,
Fernandes, head of
e
the Social
Catherine Marshall
Participation and
será
Diversity
como
Advisory
debatedora
Department, and
deste
Catherine
painel,
Marshall will
desta
be
sessão do
uh,
painel, não é? E
the
logo após a
moderator
finalização,
of
nós
this
convidamos
panel. And
todos
right after
vocês.
that, we invite all of you.
A Catherine é a debatedora e eu sou o moderador,
Catherine,
né?
well, Catherine will be the debater, the discussant, and I will be the moderator.
Só questão de tradução. E aí,
And
após
then
a finalização,
right
não é? Por volta
after
ali de meio-dia, nós teremos um almoço aqui no hotel.
about
Todos estão
noon, we're gonna
convidados a
have a
almoçarem
lunch
conosco.
here, and all of
Então
you
não
are
vão embora,
invited to
vamos
have
fazer um
lunch with us.
momento
So
juntos
don't
aqui
leave.
também,
Let's have
de
this moment
diálogo, de
together here
interação,
to have a
de
dialogue and
participação
interaction and to
durante
come
o
close
almoço.
to
Tá
each
bem? Então
other
vamos agora
during
para o
lunch.
coffee
Okay,
break. Mais
so
uma vez, uma
let's
salva
now
de
go to
palmas aqui
coffee
ao
break. A
Felício.
round of applause again for our panelists.
E temos hoje coffee break
And
regionalizado
today
aqui,
we
com
have
uma
a
tigela
regional coffee break. We have
de
cakes and things
açaí,
that are from the region. We have acai berry, vitamin. So enjoy.
Ela quer ser o seu contato, tá?